Hi, everybody. Welcome to our Sexperts times All Brains workshop. My name is Chloe, and I use she, her pronouns, and I am the co-director of Sexperts.
My name is Chloe. I also use she, her pronouns, and I'm the Curriculum Development Director of Sexperts.
Today, we're going to be talking about consent and communication in neurodiverse partnerships. So, just a note, first and foremost, we want to let you know that we are here to provide you with information, not tell you what to do. We are just peer educators. And although our information is helpful to us and helpful to others, it is not a step by step guide as to how to have a successful relationship. There's no such thing as a monolithic experience, and we want to recognize that. So, first, we're going to get into communication in neurodiverse partnerships.
All right, so a really good jumping off point for literally every single relationship is talking about your love language. So there's this concept called the five love languages that was, established a couple years ago, and it's basically just a way to identify how you best give and receive love and affection. Knowing your partner's love language is such a good starting point for having effective communication with them and can really help you, demonstrate and apply understanding, can help you solidify trust. It's a really important bonding experience. So the five love languages are physical touch, quality time, acts of service, words of affirmation, and gifts. My love language is acts of service. And it can be really fun to take the quiz together. So, that could be a little bonding activity or a little date. And it gives you, again, such a good jumping off point to, have effective communication in your relationship.
And something else that could really help bolster communication is taking the time to check in with your partner. Discussing your communication style and needs. So, beyond neurotypical expectations of body language and verbal signals and communication styles, it's good to check in with your partner, saying, like, hey, how do you best want me to communicate with you? And how can I best evaluate what you want in this relationship? So, direct conversations with explicit details can be really helpful. More casual conversations can as well. And avoiding subtext and hinting. Being straightforward and communicating with your partner in a very clear and direct way, and also asking them how they would best like to communicate with you. Knowing how somebody feels comfortable communicating is a really important way to navigate any kind of relationship, but especially if somebody's communication style doesn't necessarily match up with yours. And also know what you need to look for and emphasize in conversations with your partner. It's especially important with sex and communicating pleasure, just because those things are really difficult for everyone. So being really direct and straightforward about those things will make consent a lot easier and a lot more unambiguous, which we'll talk about a little bit later. Um, and also, it's good to be forgiving and flexible. We want to recognize that not everybody is somebody who verbally communicates, and you can find ways to communicate through body language, through signals like hugs, touch, and also just checking in with somebody and saying, like, do you feel comfortable right now? And seeing if they give a positive cue, a positive reaction. So being really in tune with your partner's feelings, with your partner's reactions is a huge part of successful communication.
Absolutely. And another really important thing that we think kind of often goes overlooked is taking the time to check in with yourself. So, you can ask yourself these questions, doesn't have to be out loud. Just take some time to reflect on, what your needs are and whether you think those needs are being met, whether you think your partner understands what they are. A really important question to ask yourself is if you feel respected. Um, and there's not like a yes or no answer necessarily to that question, but it can provide you with the tools to evaluate what you need moving forward. Um, Especially if your needs are different than that of your partner's. For example, if you are verbal and your partner's nonverbal, or if you, just it really just does depend on your unique set of needs and whether you feel that your partner is meeting them. And this is all a process, this is all a journey. So, it doesn't necessarily mean if your needs aren't being met right now, they'll never be met. That's where communication comes in. And that's where the concept of an equal partnership comes in. Um, it's really helpful to just, take time with yourself and think through these things, especially relevant, again, to sex and pleasure. We'll get into that a bit later, but knowing your boundaries, establishing your boundaries with yourself before you communicate them to your partner, super important because it can help you sort of like stick to your guns, for lack of a better term. Um, yeah, just Really, really important to help you figure out what you value, what you need, um, and where you need to go in your relationship, where you need to help your partner understand you a bit better.
So now we're going to get into consent and neurodivergence. And we're going to talk about what consent means and how we describe consent. So, if we were in a workshop interactively right now, I'd ask you all, what do you think consent is? But we're just going to tell you. Um, consent is unambiguous to both parties, meaning that you know 100% certainly that this person wants to engage in whatever activity y'all are engaging in. If there's any form of uncertainty, somebody says, I'm not sure, somebody doesn't give a really affirming nod or a really affirming reaction, somebody says, I don't know right now, all of those. So it has to be 100% certain to both parties that you know what you're engaging in. Um, Revocable, which means that you do not have to consent throughout the entire activity. You are allowed to be like, I am no longer comfortable and I take this back. And that is a part of consent. You can discuss cues beforehand, meaning that if your partner makes a certain gesture that shows that they're uncomfortable in the moment and that they're trying to revoke their consent, you pick up on that and you stop whatever's going on. Um, Enthusiastic, however that might look for you, meaning that we want consent to be a yes. Oop, sorry, guys. We want consent to be a yes rather than a maybe, meaning that enthusiasm can look so many different ways. It can look like a verbal, I'm so excited. It can look like body cues, like getting closer to your partner, touching them. And it could also look like however you verbally express yourself, not with words, but also with like moans and stuff like kind of just like excited, excited tendencies. So enthusiasm is a really important part of consent. And consent is every step of the way, meaning it's ongoing. If you're kissing and you're moving to a different activity, you want to make sure that you also consent to that different activity. And if that's not something you want to do and that's beyond your boundaries, remember your consent is revocable. You absolutely do not have to go on to that further activity. Chloe, do you have anything to add?
No, I think you summed it up really well.
Okay.
All right, so when we talk about giving and receiving consent, again, it's really, really, oh, sorry, there
Okay.
was a siren.
It's okay.
When we talk about giving and receiving consent, it's really important, again, to ask yourself those questions and then ask them to your partner as well. And this is especially important in neurodiverse partnerships because, as we've said before, the cues that one partner gives might not match up with the cues another partner gives. And your partner might not be able to pick up on your cues if you don't, make them clear beforehand. So again, ask yourself, ask your partner, what does it look like when you're enjoying yourself? What does it look like when you're into it? What does it look like when it feels good? Um, and then in the moment, how do you want me to check in with you? Does that need to be a body language cue, such as tapping on your shoulder twice just to check in, see how it's going? Do you want me to verbally check in with you, ask, hi, how's it going? Is this okay? Can I keep going? Um, and then again, totally okay if you don't get it right on the first try. Ask a clarifying question. Can you elaborate on that? What do you mean by that? Can you give me an example of that? Um, Checkpoint questions are also really important when you're wanting to make sure that your partner understands what you're saying. So, something that we say in Sexperts a lot is talking about the broken record technique. So, literally just repeating the same thing over and over again. Like, does that make sense? If it doesn't make sense, let me repeat it for you. Does that make sense? If it doesn't make sense, let me repeat it for you. Because hearing something over and over again can really help make it stick. And then just at the end of the day, being really precise as best you can, super important. Because as we've said before, all of these words about consent, unambiguous is a big one. And being precise and knowing exactly what you're comfortable with, what your partner's comfortable with, and how you can communicate that with each other, huge component of making sure that the consent you give and receive is unambiguous.
100%. So now we're going to talk about saying yes or no. And the first step to this is evaluating whether you're comfortable using the words yes and no in intimate situations, because it can be really difficult, and not everybody expresses themselves within those two words. So if you are comfortable, incorporate those words into your sexual vocabulary, meaning it is 100% okay if somebody asks you, "Do you want me to do X, Y, and Z to you?" And you just say, "No." There doesn't need to be an explanation. There doesn't need to be a reason why you're saying no. And you are 100% okay to use that simple of a word to describe the feelings in that moment. But it's also super important to say yes if something does sound really desirable. You don't have to be embarrassed to want to do sexual acts. You don't have to feel sheepish about saying yes to things. If something sounds really good to you and your power dynamic is set, feel equal, things feel unambiguous, and you're really into it, feel free to say yes or to indicate yes enthusiastically with your body language, with your eyes. That is 100% within your right and a really, really good practice. If you're not comfortable using those two, just yes and no, explore other ways of expressing interest and disinterest. Sometimes it's really hard to say those two words, especially if sex is something that's new, if sex is something that it's not super experienced yet. So there are other ways to indicate your cues. Like Chloe said, you're 100% allowed to flesh those out before a sexual situation and to say, when I shake my head twice, it means I do not want to continue. When I tap your shoulder, it means I like what's happening. I want to keep going. And establishing those cues beforehand can be immensely helpful in a sexual situation. Note, tell your partner beforehand that these are your cues. Just make sure that your partner knows when those two taps on the shoulder happen, it means I like this. I want to keep going. So that your partner can have a good idea of how to keep the situation going in a way that's positive for both of you. And you can draw on inspiration from other areas of your life too. Sexual communication doesn't have to be super different from how we communicate with each other in real life. So, how do you turn down an invitation to hang out when you're tired and you want to stay home? It could be like, I don't feel like it right now. And that is 100% a valid way to turn down sex as well. And if you say, I don't feel like it right now, somebody needs to respect that. How do you turn down foods you don't like? How do you? Do you make a face? Do you kind of just be like, no, not in the mood? That's also great for sex. Making a face, your partner should know that is not something that my partner wants to do. If there's a negative reaction to anything sexual, that is a cue, and that's a clear cue. Um, and then allow yourself room to explore which phrases, which body language cues feel comfortable for you. So feel free to try new things. Feel free to discuss this with your partner, to have that communication if you can. There are lots of different ways to express consent, and we want to make it sure that you have all of these tools in your belt for engaging in sexual experiences to make it the most fun and the most comfortable for both parties.
If I could throw in one more thing here, um, just want to validate the fact that this is a really intrinsically important part of neurodivergent communication. Neurotypical definitions of what consent looks like can be really, really different from what they actually look like in neurodiverse partnerships. So, for example, um, most mainstream consent communication will say that, like, making a face or using a nonverbal cue to indicate what you like and what you don't like, that that's not acceptable. But we're telling you that it is.
Yes,
As
it
long as
is.
communication is established beforehand and you understand what that means when you see it in your partner, that's 100% a valid way of communicating. And the problem with mainstream consent communication is that it's so neurotypical and really does not take into account the variety of experiences that sexual beings have. So we just wanted to, make that clear here and validate you again. Everything you're doing is okay. And just because it doesn't match up with what sex educators have been saying about consent for the last 50 years doesn't mean that it's not okay.
Absolutely. And it doesn't mean you can't engage in sex because we know you can and we want you to and have amazing experiences with it if that's something that you want.
All right. And then in the moment, getting sexy. Foreplay, so important, literally always. It can help you, get ready for sex, make sex feel better. And it can also just help you stay present in the moment. Um, Foreplay also doesn't necessarily mean what media portrays it to be. Foreplay could be like having a conversation. Foreplay could be sitting close to each other, not necessarily touching, but spending time together just so that you are both in the same headspace and you can help evaluate where the other person's at. Foreplay can look like so many different things. And the most important thing to keep in mind is that it takes time. For some people, it takes 3 minutes and then they're ready. But for some people, it can take like a couple of hours, to be honest. And that's, again, totally okay. Looks different for different people. And then in the moment, especially if you've never had sex with this person before, you can go slow, figure it out, explore sensations, let go of orgasm as the goal of sex, figure out, which parts of your body feel good when they're touched, which parts of your body don't feel good when they're touched. Um, Sex doesn't have to be like one and done, trying to get the partner to come as quickly as possible. Um, it can be a really worthwhile experience to just like take your time, have fun, enjoy skin on skin, enjoy being physically close with somebody else. Especially important with neurodivergent people is being aware of really sensitive areas on your body, potentially trigger points, trigger phrases, and then conversely, being aware of places on your body that can help ground your partner. So, if you know that there's a place on your body, or maybe even a specific word or phrase that can help you really stay focused and stay present in the moment if you feel yourself drifting, be aware of that, tell your partner, and then practice it, put it into praxis, which again will help you just keep sex moving. Because it can be kind of difficult sometimes if you need to jump out of the moment to check in. And if you've never seen a cue before and you've never talked about the cue, it can like disrupt the flow. But if you know that beforehand, it can help sex just like be sexier and keep going when you want it to keep going.
Absolutely. I love it. So, with that, we want to thank y'all for coming out. If you have any further questions, because this is one of our shorter workshops, feel free to go to the link in our little bio at UCLA Sexperts and ask us an anonymous question. We have a forum called Ask a Sexpert, and we will be happy to do more research and get back to you. You can also just direct message us on Sexperts Instagram. We always get back to people that way as well. And if you want more information about sex and love and sexual health and pleasure, feel free to keep up with us. We love engaging with new folks, and we were so happy to be able to give this workshop. Thank you so much, Allbrains, for having us, and we hope you guys have a lovely day.
And we hope you have lovely sex. Thanks so
Woohoo!
much.